Hello everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Session 5 of Star Trek Bastet. If this is your first time joining us, hello and welcome. We are an actual play podcast that is role-playing using the Star Trek Adventure system by Modiphius Entertainment. We are set aboard a time-traveling Prometheus class with a skeleton crew of young officers. Now, don't stress if you can't stick around for the full session or if you haven't caught up on previous sessions. Most of my games moving forward are going to be the type that you can just sort of drop in, enjoy, and really take it at your own pace. And the good news is that there are both VODs and audio only versions available on YouTube and most of the popular podcast solutions. Now, you're probably noticing by now that instead of seeing my lovely avatar on screen, you're seeing our special guest for the evening, Mr. Datig, which kind of leads me into a little bit of a disclaimer. So, tonight is going to be the court martial of Lieutenant Kader. Let's just say in the previous episode, he did something that threw most everyone for a loop. And instead of just sort of glossing over that, we as a group decided to explore that a little bit because it was one of those Trek situations that I think everyone can agree is very interesting to explore. So we are going to be holding a full court martial tonight. But I do have to again say a few disclaimers. First things first, we're not lawyers. Please do not take anything we say as actual legal advice. You should not think that this is real or any way related to anyone personal, yada, yada, yada. The other thing I need to say is that court martials can be pretty heavy and sometimes feel like personal attacks if you're not prepared for them. The key for everyone involved, both player, GM, viewer alike, we're hopefully all reacting in character rather than out of character. So just keep that in mind. If two characters are at each other's throats, they don't actually hate each other out of character. I think that's it for the disclaimer, but on the notice of legal stuff, I actually am going to take a moment here to hype up the Star Trek JAG game I'll be spinning up in a few weeks. And let's just say I already have a stellar cast for that. And if all goes well, you will see our first stream session of that game on May 2nd. But let's just go around and have everyone introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Dottig, and then we'll do the captain in normal order from there.
Hey guys, I'm Aaron. I play Lieutenant Commander Keeve Datig. He's a Tellarite science officer slash XO and former doctor, currently stationed aboard the U.S.S. Congo. Catch Star Trek Congo Tuesday nights. Um, I live in Eastern Canada. I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope we're all going to have a lot of fun tonight.
Hey guys, I'm Alex. I am playing Commander Abasi, the Cation captain of the Bastet.
Hey everyone, my name is Nikhil and I play Lieutenant Salim Alexio, and I'm very anxious to see what happens tonight.
I'm Brian. I'm at MindOverBrian on Twitter and on Twitch, although on Twitch I spell it with a 0. And I play our Danon First Officer, Lieutenant Commander Baylor Droxine.
Everybody, I'm Dare Wolf at Dare Wolf Gaming 88 on Twitch, and I play Lieutenant Kalos Kader, the Chief Medical Officer, and I regret nothing.
Hello everyone, my name is Matthew. I play Lieutenant Tir Thavarin, the Benzite Chief Engineer slash Tactical Officer, though that might be argued. And you may also be seeing a cameo appearance from Captain Lee from the Congo game at the end of tonight's session, the intensely religious Bajoran captain.
And the disembodied voice speaking you from beyond the void is ELH, the Game Master. And today, I believe the captain of the God, look at me, I'm already saying captain. Commander Abasi has the opening log today, so take it away.
Captain's log, stardate 93988.2. All has not been well over the last few days. Simply put, I'm not even sure where to begin. Where and what was the start of all of this? Did the trouble start from when we located the U.S.S. relativity? Or was all of this bubbling up under the surface from day one? Is it my own inexperience with the subtleties and nuance of commanding a starship that let this get so far away from me? Well, I suppose I can start with the positive things that have happened. With Captain Raylor coming on board, we were able to assist in reversing, preventing, the relativity's temporal drives containment breach and forestalling our own untimely detonation if 8 loops of the same event is anything to go by. We were also able to install 29th century temporal shielding tech into the systems of the Bastet, shore up any issues we had with our own objectivity. With all the unique systems that we've had slowly adding, we've become quite an interesting ship, if not something of a headache in terms of maintenance and engineering. As for the rest of what has happened, the aforementioned temporal loops that we found ourselves caught in brought to light the true colors of several of our crew. Firstly, that Lieutenant Versa was not at all what we thought of her, but a Romulan sleeper agent. Any attempts that I've had to try and get information from her, I've only been met with silence. Lieutenant Kader, after a brief stay in the brig for the attempted murder of Versa, I've had since confined to his quarters. I have to ask myself again, how did I miss all of this? Surely there must have been signs that something was going on, that something was heading in this direction. After reporting the situation to the Babylon fleet, the Admiral sees fit to hold a general court-martial of the Doctor back in the current time at Deep Space October. When we arrive, Versa will be given over to the Admiral's care, and the Bastet itself will be brought into dry dock for both resupply and a refit. I've been informed that there will be special counsel to represent the prosecution, someone with prior experience before a tribunal. The fact that I think is going to make this interesting is I've been voluntold by the Admiral to act as Kader's defense counsel. As I sit and reflect on what happened, I'm angry. Angry at Verissa for betraying us. Angry at Kader for stepping out of line, acting as rash as he had, for taking the decision of what to do out of my hands. And I'm angry with myself. I told myself I would be more careful. That after what happened to Thrace, I'd be more watchful. Instead, I nearly allowed it to happen again. No, I did allow it to happen again. But I have a duty to perform. A duty to this uniform, a duty to her memory. And in this, I won't fail again. End log.
Very nice. And you may, of course, start with a... let's give you 2 momentum for that log. But our first scene for the day is going to take place outside of Lieutenant Kader's quarters. And Commander Abasi, you sort of chime the door. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Kader here. Does the door open?
It does.
All right. So as the door opens, Kader, is there anything special that you've done with your quarters, or is it pretty much as it always has been?
So Kader is not wearing his uniform. Don't let the getup fool you. And he's sitting on his bench where you see him, and he's got one of those holographic cats on his lap. And he's just quietly petting it, looks up, sees the captain, and then just looks back down and keeps petting the cat.
Is it all right if I enter?
It's your ship, sir.
I was just gonna nod slightly, step in, move over towards the chair, but he's not gonna sit quite yet. I wanted to talk to you, Kader.
About what, sir?
I want to know why you did it.
Computer end program. The cat disappears, and Kader is going to rub his hands together nervously for a few moments. Captain, I think you know why I did it.
I need to hear the reasoning.
When I reached out and I touched Verissa's mind, I touched yours as well. And in that moment, I saw what you were going to do, or at least what you were going to allow to happen, Captain. And the way in which the crew looks at me now, I couldn't let them look at you that way. It's my fault that you're in this position. And if you had done that, if you had killed her or allowed her to be killed, then they would look at you the same way they look at me. And this ship needs a captain more than it needs whatever I am, sir.
It was not your decision to make. The responsibility and the weight of that should have been on my shoulders. You were out of line. You stepped around me. You acted out of line.
I won't argue with you, sir, but I stand by my decision and my actions. And all that I've ever done has been to protect this crew. But I am sorry, sir. Sorry for everything. Captain, what's to be done with me, sir, if I may ask?
Currently, we are en route to Deep Space October. You are going to stand trial for what has occurred.
I understand, sir. Was there anything else?
No, not at this time.
You're a good captain, sir. And you'll continue to be one.
Abasi is going to start towards the door, but he stops as Kader is saying, "You are a good captain and will be one." Just kind of stands there staring at the still closed door. I'm glad that you think so, though I question that.
That's what makes you a good captain, sir.
With what's transpired, I question that. He's gonna step towards the door. If they open, he's gonna walk out.
As he walks out, I'm gonna look down and say, "Computer resume program," and keep petting the cat.
All right. So, Abasi, as you leave, we're now going to actually transition to the brig of the Bastet, where, Droxine, you step inside the brig, and manning the controls is Lieutenant Mir, and behind a active force field is Lieutenant Verissa.
Well, we are almost to Deep Space October. I hear tell that the captain's plan is to hand you off to the fleet admiral.
And I think Verissa just stares at you silently, doesn't really give any sort of reaction, not even a raised eyebrow.
Verissa, I kind of thought that when this cruise started, that you and I sort of had a rapport, and I'm a little hurt that after working so hard to save your life, you won't even tell me why you did it.
Still, no reaction.
But I mean, that's your right. I mean, I certainly don't want to. I certainly wouldn't want you to incriminate yourself. I hope the cell is not too confined. I'm sure we could get you a blanket or a pillow or something.
Again, no answer. And at this point, even Mir's like looking at you, Droxine, like, "I'm sorry, sir. She has been like that pretty much with every visitor."
Verissa, did you know that Lieutenant Kader reports another Varessa beaming off the sickbay.
There's almost a hint where, just for the briefest of moment, Varissa's face, the lines of it become a little bit more pronounced, but it's so quick and it goes back to normal so quickly that you almost wonder if you saw anything at all or if you just imagined it.
I just want you to know that, I mean, if you have a defense, I at least am willing to hear it. I know the rest of the crew has put a lot of credence in the story that Captain Raylure has told us, but she's the only one who seems to remember this time loop, and I'm a little suspicious of how convenient it is that she was handed a phaser and she hadn't noticed you. Anyway, let Lieutenant Meir know if you feel like you want to talk, but I'll be unlikely to see you until or before you're dropped off at U.S.S. October. So, despite your actions or supposed actions during the time loop, it was a pleasure to serve with you. And then Droxine will turn around and leave, I guess.
So, and I've been waiting for that. So when you start to leave, you hear Varissa say something, and as you turn back, she repeats it and says, 7.
7.
There are 7 things I've hidden on this ship. And now that I've told you that, you're going to tear apart every deck plate, every single square inch of this vessel, trying to figure out what exactly it is I did. And you're never going to trust anyone on your crew again.
It's a lot more mean-spirited than I expected, I'm not gonna lie. But I guess thanks for the warning.
And then she just kind of goes back to being passive. And this time, as you leave, it's Mir who stops you, and Mir kind of pulls you aside and says, I understand we're supposed to transfer her to the Admiral once we arrive at DSO.
Mm-hmm. That's what Captain tells me.
No offense, and I don't mean this to sound racist, but I'm a little concerned. I mean, if she's a Romulan agent, shouldn't we have more security on her?
Did you have someone in mind? There are only so many of us, and unfortunately, a lot of us are pinned to the bridge.
That was kind of my concern, sir. I don't know. I mean, if you have the time, I would not mind. I just think there should be 2 people here, not just 1.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to stick around. I don't have any pressing business anywhere else.
And she sort of smiles and moves over so that you can at least have a console to do something on. We are now going to transition to 2 forward, where in the lounge we see our lovable Tavarin and Lieutenant Alexio going over a literal stack of pads that consumes most of the table space in this lounge. And I'm going to let you 2 take it from there.
Okay, so we have the requisition for antideuterium stores, right? Do we need a year's supply of that, or should we prepare for more?
We theoretically should prepare for decades.
I'm not entirely comfortable carrying around enough antideuterium to level like 5, 6 cities.
And Alexio just looks at the pad and then just like kind of slams it on the table, and it's just like, I'm sorry, it's all looking like nonsense to me right now.
I don't even know why we're doing this. This is a first officer's job. I don't even understand half of these requisition forms.
I think the intention was good. I think they were trying to give us something to occupy our mind.
I suppose I can appreciate that. I mean, I really thought that Kader was deceiving us, that it was some kind of trick. I didn't think that he had it in him.
I I didn't either. And the effects his actions have had on Rilla is, I'm sorry. I put myself between Captain Rilla and Marissa. And there was a moment there where I thought she was going to shoot right through me. And she didn't. And that was my proudest moment as a Starfleet officer, knocking her down. And then I'm sorry to trouble you with this.
No, it's not your fault. You went above and beyond the call of duty. You intervened and you saved her life. I mean, who knows what would have happened? Maybe Droxine wouldn't have been able to save her if you hadn't intervened, but I was the one who should have taken Verissa into custody immediately when there was even the suggestion that she might betray us. I'm the one who didn't see how far gone Kader was. I'm the acting security chief. This kind of thing, a threat to the crew, is my responsibility, and I didn't see it. I didn't realize maybe how I was affecting Kader. I thought I was pushing him to be a better officer, but did I do this? Is that something that I've contributed to? By all that hostility, by all that pushing?
Well, your attitude sometimes has been unhelpful, but I think that if there is anything you're guilty of, it's putting too much on yourself. I know you like to be competitive, but I think it's more than that. I think the reason you call yourself Chief Tactical Security and Engineering Officer isn't just because you want to prove that you can do it, but because you want to do that. You want to do that all for us. You want to keep us safe. But if you keep putting that much pressure on yourself, there are things that are going to slip through the cracks.
You're right. In a lot of ways, I have spread myself too thin. I guess, in a way, you're right. I want to be useful. And by trying to do too much, I've, I guess, realized my worst fear. I've become worth less.
Well, as someone who's spent most of my life being the useless one, maybe I could help take on a little bit of the burden.
Thanks, Alexio. I really do appreciate that. You're kind of doing that right now, I guess.
How about we just set this aside and grab a drink before the trial?
You know what, Alexio? I think I'd really like that. But I guess I kind of monopolized this time. Did you want to talk about Relur? I mean, that has to be really complicated for the three of you.
As difficult as it is for me, it hasn't been easy for our Lieutenant Relur. She is a woman of great compassion and kindness despite her snarkiness. To see her older self become a cold-blooded killer, it's traumatic. It'd be traumatic for any of us. I I I just don't know what I can say or do to even help her feel even a little better.
I think, Alexio, if I may be so bold, if our experiences have taught us anything, it's that the future is never set in stone. Even the smallest change can have a dramatic impact. Who she's going to become can't possibly be that woman. She's seen that future, and maybe she understands a little bit more about the steps that could be taken to lead her there. Knowing that, she doesn't have to be that person. None of us have our destiny set in stone.
Thank
think
you.
I think on that note, that's where we'll pull away from this little scene, because I think it's a perfect way to start the trial with that sort of ringing freshly in our minds. So we are going to skip ahead just a little bit here in the timeline. We of course see a exterior shot of the Bastet pulling into Deep Space October, and we of course have the gratuitous shot of the big shot. The what are they called? Like the big doors on the side of the saucer section of the station open up. The Bastet flies in. We spend about 20 minutes just doing circles of the ship, and then eventually the ship docks. But we then transition to the interior of a courtroom. Now, in this courtroom already are three individuals, and of course, the rest of the senior staff, if they wish to be here, they can certainly do so. I just don't have token room for everybody. But the important thing is that already present is the prosecutor. And for those who don't know Datig, Aaron, tell us a little bit about what Mr. Datig looks like in this instance.
Lieutenant Commander Datig is a Tellarite, so he is a short, rather porcine man with thick, thick mane of gold streaked with white hair covering most of his head, neck, and face. He is wearing a standard blue Sciences uniform with the Lieutenant Commander pips. Poignant simply because he is not in a dress uniform. And his posture is just short of being entirely outraged at his presence in the position that he's in the courtroom.
All right. And the other occupants are, of course, Commander Abbasi and Lieutenant Kader at the defendant's desk. And I did want to give you three just a moment or two before the Admiral and her staff walked in.
Caleb is uncharacteristically quiet and non-jittery.
Datig will actually cross the floor to them and actually regard Commander Abbasi and say, Commander, Lieutenant Commander Keith Datig, U.S.S. Congo. I'm sorry that we had to meet under these circumstances.
Abbasi's gonna nod his head lightly, offer out his hand. Lieutenant Commander Abbasi. Likewise, I wish it could have been better circumstances than this. As he says that, he's gonna look aside towards Kader before looking back.
And you'll notice that Datig is not regarding Kader at all, almost as though to his eyes he simply is not there. You say, I want you to know I respect the position that you're in. I know it can't be an easy one. But that being said, I have a job to do, and I hope that you don't take it personally.
At the comment of "I can't understand your position," Kader's going to let out a snort, like a muffled laugh.
That's gonna draw Abbasi's attention over to him again. Just a little shake of his head before looking back towards Datig. I appreciate the sentiment. This is the first time I found myself in a situation like this. I won't take what you say to heart.
Tell me, was it Fleet Admiral Ignitrix that put you up to it?
Yes.
Me too. And at that, Dathig will simply spin and head back to his seat at the prosecution.
It's probably about then that as you sort of sit and wonder what that all means, the left door behind the jury sort of bench that we have there opens up, and proceeding out onto the court floor are several individuals. The first, of course, is the Fleet Admiral herself, Ignitrix. She is in her dress blue uniform, which is almost like we see on Picard. Normally, of course, we'd see me, in my avatar, and I could just point at myself, but since I'm not on screen, you know what I'm doing. But she's in that sort of Picard dress uniform with the gold stripes on the blue, wearing the full 5 pips, and that are sort of centered around a trapezoidal bar that represents her being a Fleet Admiral. She takes her seat at the center chair. Walking in behind her is what looks to be a human individual. You would know him even just sort of looking, especially for you on both prosecution and defense. This is Ensign Williams. And Ensign Williams is the court stenographer. And side note, Williams is actually one of my patrons. He was a character that requested to be here, and I thought I'd grant that request. Now, that's not the only people that walk in. Walking in from the other side of the room, we see Orion and Vulcan hybrid, the Commander Tivna. She takes a seat at the computer console that you will be using to call up evidence, logs, things of that nature. And acting as security for the trial is Master Chief Ember. Ember, of course, being a 9-foot-tall Amazonian of a woman, red skin, golden horns, looks like she could probably snap your neck, etc., etc. But as everybody filters in and everybody gets situated, the Fleet Admiral motions for Datig and Abasi to approach the bench.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely.
Abasi will walk up.
And Ignitrix sort of leans in so that hopefully only you two can hear, but if anyone really wants to listen in, it's not like she's being that quiet. But she sort of leans in and says, "Gentlemen, I realize that this is going to be a difficult trial for the both of you. I know you both don't want to be doing this, but in my experience, getting a reluctant person to act as JAG is better than somebody coming in with an agenda. Now, before we begin, a few ground rules. You, of course, can't object, as is outlined in the Starfleet Uniform Code of Justice, and I do want a fair and, I hesitate to use the word unbiased trial, but I think we all know that there's already bias present. So what I'll say is this: don't start fights in my courtroom, don't lead witnesses, don't goad witnesses into attacking you, things of that nature. Am I clear?
Understood.
Very good. And she sort of leans back and motions for you all to return to your own respective tables. And I think at this point, Master Chief Ember actually sort of wanders behind the actual bar, like, the division between the actual courtroom and, like, the stands. I forget what they're actually called. But she sort of walks behind, shuts the door, and says, "All right, we're good, Fleet Admiral." And Fleet Admiral Ignitrix takes a little metal rod, strikes it twice against a bell, and as the ring settles down to quiet, she says, "We now begin the court-martial of Lieutenant Kader. I understand that, Ensign Williams, you will be reading the charges." And Williams sort of perks up and says, "Yes, ma'am. We have an account of first and second degree murder. We also have accounts of attempted murder. We have possession of a deadly substance. We have violation of the Hippocratic Oath. I honestly could go on, Fleet Admiral, but those are the major charges." And the Fleet Admiral nods and says, "Probably the only ones that really matter in the greater context." Very well. Opening statements. Mr. Datig, would you care to go first?
Thank you, Your Honor. And Datig will rise and sort of begin to pace back and forth here in front of the benches. Yeah. Officers of the court, we are here today to discuss a matter of grave importance. Lieutenant Kader, and his recent conduct is quite frankly shocking. He freely admits most recently to the attempted murder of a saboteur previously known as Lieutenant Viressa. That fact is not in dispute. In the direct aftermath of his latest assault, the Bastet's bridge recorder will clearly show that he stated something to the effect of, "She was a problem, and I took care of the problem. I accept whatever consequences come next." And for the first time, he'll regard Kader and he says, "That day has arrived. And now it is time for us to begin our mission, to determine the exacerbating and mitigating factors in this case. We cannot simply read the final chapter of a book and claim understanding. What we need to understand this case is an understanding of history, no pun intended. We need an understanding of the history of the U.S. Bastet and its missions, its crew, and most of all, its chief medical officer. It is my intent to show that difficult professional and operational circumstances, command and directional deficiency, and a general disregard for the guiding principles of the medical service and Starfleet compounded Lieutenant Kader's disregard for sentient life, not directly beneficial to his own. And to do that, we must start at the beginning." And he'll turn and return to his bench.
Ignitrix nods and says, "Defense, your opening statement."
Yes, ma'am. Abasi will stand and, again, walk towards the front of the stand. Ladies and gentlemen, and others gathered here, it is my hope today that I'll be able to show that the actions Lieutenant Kader has taken have been for the benefit and for the protection of his ship and his crew. While some may question the method and the motive behind it, that intentions were nothing but for the best for those he wished to protect and care for. That he'll look up towards the fleet admiral, nod his head lightly,
She nods back a little bit.
and then he will go and take a seat.
All right. After sparing a glance at Williams to make sure he got all that, Ignitrix clears her throat and says, "Very well, prosecution. Please call your first witness."
Dante will rise and say, "Prosecution calls Commander Abasi."
Abasi will rise.
You're going to want that chair to her right on the map.
Up here.
Yep, you got it. And yeah, of course, Ember comes up and has you do the whole swearing in, to, uphold the truth, tell nothing but the truth, etc., etc. And after you're sworn in and Ember sort of goes back to pout in a corner as she does, Ignitrix sort of motions at Dotig that you may proceed.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Abasi.
Thank you. And please give your initial assignment aboard the U.S.S. Congo as well as your current assignment aboard the U.S.S. Congo.
I'm not assigned to the U.S.S. Congo.
Oh, sorry. Man, see, I'm talking about Congo. Dang it. Okay.
Yeah, I think the Ignitrix leans in and says,
USS
Dotig.
Bastet.
Yeah, Bastet.
Bastet. Bastet. I ruined it.
My initial assignment to the U.S.S. Bastet was as a gamma shift engineer.
And your current assignment?
Captain.
Gamma shift engineer to captain. That's quite the meteoric rise. I imagine captain of necessity.
Yes, sir.
Can you explain to the court the circumstances surrounding your appointment as captain of the USS Bastet?
Yes. On our initial departure from Starbase, we were simply a transport crew bringing the ship to receive its true complement and true crew. En route, we encountered an offshoot from the Nexus ribbon. This moved us through time, as well as did some significant damage to the vessel. The commander at the time, Commander Marlowe, was critically injured in this process.
And I assume, based on your assignment, did not recover.
As far as I'm aware, he has not recovered yet.
Very good. And how was it determined that you would be the one to take command?
So with that, Abasi is going to pause for a minute, draw in a breath. By a malfunctioning computer.
Could you please elaborate?
Of course. After the temporal transit, the computer systems were damaged. Myself and a few other officers worked on getting them back operational, back online. The Lieutenant Kader, in his exuberance for my work in getting the system back online, said, and I quote, "Way to go, Captain Kitty." The computer seemed to have taken that as the chief medical officer assigning a new captain of necessity.
Well, unorthodox to be sure, but in Starfleet, the unorthodox is often the ordinary. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes, sir.
In that particular instant, where were you physically located? The main computer core?
In main engineering.
Main engineering. Was Lieutenant Kader present in main engineering?
Yes, he was.
Was the critically injured Commander Marlowe in sickbay at the time?
He had been transported to sickbay, yes.
Was Lieutenant Kader the acting chief medical officer at the time?
He was, yes.
Can you please explain why the chief medical officer was in engineering assisting with computer core repair while the previous commander of the vessel lay critically injured in sickbay?
The Commander Marlowe had been placed into a stasis field to preserve the life signs that he was currently showing. We needed all hands to effect repairs on the ship at the moment.
Very well. Can you outline the nature of your relationship with Lieutenant Kader? Let me be specific. As his commanding officer, I see entries in your logs describing him as rash and impulsive, taking the initiative perhaps a little too quickly sometimes without prior authorization, which is a trait among young officers, I know. However, you also say the majority of your crew has done this from time to time. You say he shows considerable medical skill, and he takes setbacks as further motivation to cultivate those skills. Admirable qualities. One part of your log draws my eye specifically in that you state he is someone who believes in Starfleet's ideals. Can you please define Starfleet's ideals for the court?
Only that Starfleet's ideals is to seek out the unknown, to explore, to better ourselves, to better those we work with, those that we can help.
Very good. The Starfleet's ideals include murder.
No, they do not.
As the commanding officer, did Lieutenant Kader display warning signs early on that this tendency towards the quick and easy solution to, shall we say, enemy actors would be prevalent?
In that regard, no. I do not believe he showed any signs that he would resort to such drastic action.
And as his commanding officer, these rash impulses that he's often given to, the risks, the unwarranted initiative, if you'll forgive the phrase. As commanding officer, what were your corrective and preventative actions to prevent these trends from continuing?
Aside from several verbal reprimands requesting him to follow the proper chain of command in such future activities, there was also a formal reprimand into his file.
Did the formal reprimand come with any sort of constraint, be it physical or regarding ship's facilities?
It did not, no.
And being loose in the time stream, there was no guarantee that any of you would have ever made it back, is that correct?
That is correct.
And therefore, is it not outside the realm of possibility that Lieutenant Kader believed he was operating in a consequence-free environment?
And I think at this, Ignitrix coughs a little and goes, a little bit leading there, Council.
Withdrawn. Captain, I suppose my main question for you is, do you believe that Kader's actions are the result of a deficiency somewhere outside of himself? Or do you believe that he is solely responsible?
Can you please elaborate on what you mean by a deficiency outside of himself?
I'm asking, Captain, if you believe that you are up to the task placed before you.
With that question, Abasi is going to look down for a few moments as he considers his response. I believe that in this particular instance, this has been Kader's own doing, not an outside influence.
Not just... Thank you. I appreciate your honesty, Captain, and I appreciate your objectivity in this. I have no further questions for you. You may step down.
Abasi will nod and return.
Well, as you start to get up, the Fleet Admiral actually kind of holds out a hand and says, "It is unorthodox, Commander, but if you wish to refute any of the statements you've just made as the defending clientele, out of character, I think I said, you know what I'm saying." She says, "This is your chance to perhaps expand upon what you've just said."
And at that, Datig will raise his hand and say, if I may, Admiral, Captain, she's telling you that you have the right to cross-examine yourself.
Thank you, Datig. This is why I have you in my courtroom. And she stares at you, not mad, but kind of just very neutral for a moment.
I appreciate the opportunity. However, I will pass on it, as I believe anything I could say to refute what I said previously will only seem self-serving.
Very well, then you may step down. And once you're back at your seat, Ignitrix actually turns to Commander Tivna and says, Tivna, can you, just for my sake, can you confirm everything that just happened? Tivna turns from the terminal and nods and says, yes, Admiral, I can confirm that the Captain Kitty order was given. I can confirm that the reprimand is in the file. Everything checks out. Ignitrix nods and turns back and says, very well. I know traditionally it would be the prosecution's turn to call another witness, but let's mix things up. Abasi, who's your first witness?
Abasi will stand from the seat. I would like to call as my first witness Lieutenant Alexio.
And Ember actually kind of looks in the back. And Alexio, are you present for the trial?
Yes, I am.
All right. Then Ember sort of does one of those crook of a finger that motions you should approach. And you, of course, pass through. And I am saying it is the bar. Like, that is the actual term between, like, the audience and the courtroom. It's the bar. You pass through that. And you go straight to the stand where, of course, again, Ember sort of reads you in. And he's now your witness, Abasi.
Lieutenant, if you would, for the court, please, your name, rank, and current assignment.
Salim Alexio, Lieutenant. Current assignment is Chief of Chrono Intelligence for the U.S.S. Bastet.
If you would as well, how long have you known Lieutenant Kader?
Well, I met him on my first day assigned to this ship. And I suppose you could say I've known him since then.
And your working relationship with him?
I mean, I've served as a helpful figure around the ship to all departments. I did assist a couple times, not very well, in the medical bay, but other than that, I was treated by him several times, and I didn't find anything deficient in the treatment.
You mentioned that you have assisted him in sickbay several times, correct?
Yes, I've assisted everyone.
If you could please outline what procedures and how exactly you assisted the doctor.
Well, the incident that comes most to mind is when Lieutenant Relleur's eyes were damaged in a psychic backlash. I attempted to assist the doctor in stabilizing her condition, though we saved her life. At the time, we were unsuccessful in restoring her eyesight.
And during the course of this, the doctor how dedicated to his task was he?
He was absolutely dedicated. I would say he put a lot of himself into it. He shut everything else out. He was to the point of obsessiveness, completely dedicated to saving Relur's life and eyesight.
Fleet Admiral, I must object. The witness's opinion on Lieutenant Kader's state of mind has no bearing on this case.
Ignitrix thinks that for a moment and says, Tivna, do we have a psychiatric profile for Kader that would allow this introduction of opinion? And Tivna turns and works to the terminal and says, no, Admiral, but if you wish, I could perform one now. Would only take a moment or so. And Ignitrix nods and turns back to Kader. Mr. Kader, if you are so willing, Commander Tivna possesses a unique ability that will allow her to gauge your mental state. Is this something you would like to consent to?
Kader will simply nod in agreement.
I'm going to need a verbal offering, Mr. Kader.
I will, sir.
And Ignitrix nods, and Tivna approaches, and what you notice is that as she does so, there is actually a little bit of shimmer along her left hand as she sort of reaches it out towards you. And as she does this, Tivna says, just try to relax, Lieutenant. This will only hurt for a moment. And as she very gingerly touches the side of your head with two fingers, you remember how I described the backlash between Relure and the temporal agent? Like, the intensity involved. There's that same sort of backlash, but unlike with Relure, your pain only lasts for almost the briefest of instants, just enough to maybe gain insight to what Relure maybe underwent, but not enough that there's any lasting damage. And after a moment, Tivna pulls her finger away and says, well, Mr. Dottig, I can confirm that he was rather dedicated and obsessive. And I will, of course, enter that into the log.
Very good. Your Honor, I withdraw the objection.
And as Tivna takes her seat again, the Fleet Admiral kind of smiles and says, well then, as you were saying, Mr. Abasi.
Thank you, ma'am. Abasi actually pauses for a few moments. This is, for him, the first time he's been called upon to do such, and probably doesn't quite show the same eloquence that Lieutenant Commander Dottig does before the stand. I have no further questions for you, Lieutenant.
Ignitrix turns and says, well, you're a witness, Dottig.
And Dottig will approach and say, Lieutenant Alexio, could you elaborate on your work to save your crewmates' eyesight? Relure, I believe you said.
Oh, well, yes. To be honest, I can't give you much more about the ins and outs of it. I was following Lieutenant Kader's direction for the most part. I'm not a medical expert.
Understood. And in that moment, you mentioned his dedication, his single-mindedness, his obsession. Was he obsessed with protecting the crew?
Well, I want to be careful here because we've established I'm not an expert in reading minds, but I will say it appeared to me from the things he said that was an important part of his self-identity.
Very good. And if the logs were provided to me correctly, and he'll sort of shoot Tivna a look, More not actually malicious, but more like, haha, got one over on you. You stepped in front of Captain Merlor to shield Veresa.
Yes, I stepped in front of her to try and convince her not to kill Verissa.
And when Lieutenant Kader attempted to murder her with a nanovirus that he conveniently carried with him, were you shocked?
I was. I had just put my life on the line to try and prevent that murder from happening. When a member of the crew then went and made that meaningless, I was shocked, and frankly, I was betrayed.
Understandable. And he'll just sort of look around at everybody and say, I want us to really listen to his words here for a minute. I put my life on the line to prevent a murder. That, to me, and to many, the highest ideal of Starfleet. A great captain once said, we do not put unarmed people in harm's way under any circumstance. And sometimes that means we lose the battle, and sometimes it means we lose our lives. And to the officer that he was addressing at the time, he said, if you're not able to do that, then maybe you shouldn't be wearing that uniform. Thank you, Lieutenant Alexia. I have no further questions.
Thank you. And I'll step away.
Yeah. And as you step away, Fleet Admiral says, well, Mr. Datig, since we're doing this in round-robin fashion, you may call the next witness.
Very well. The prosecution calls Lieutenant Commander Droxine.
And Droxine, I'm assuming you are also present in the stands?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, the whole song and dance with Ember, she leads you up, gets you sworn in, etc., etc. And as you take a seat, I actually want to have you roll something.
Oh.
I want to have you roll for me a insight and a security at difficulty of 2. And if it matters, you do have 2 momentum right now.
Well, I will spend 1 to get an extra dice, obviously. Do I have an applicable focus?
Let me take a gander at your focuses here. No, you would not have one. All right.
Hey.
So with 2 successes, what you realize, Droxine, that as you sit behind the little sort of stand there, you sort of look around and it's almost like there's a haze that moves between the bench where Datig is currently seated and the defense bench. It's almost like a wave of heat. Like if you were to look at a road that has been bathing in the summer sun for a while, you would sort of see those heat lines. Mm-hmm. You would see that same sort of heat line sort of transition between Datig and Kader and Abasi. But as you sort of look a little bit closer, whatever it was is gone.
Are you all right, Commander?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Commander, please tell the court in your own words what your current role aboard the U.S.S. Bastet is currently.
I am currently the Bastet's first officer.
Very good. Any secondary functions?
I'm also the helmsman.
prior experience has taught me that's a dangerous combination.
Doing all right so far, I think, sir.
Well, you made it back in one piece and even got into space dock, so how about that? Commander, you've heard the previous testimony regarding Lieutenant Kader. Much of it is regarding character, state of mind, very subjective things.
Mhm.
An individual can be, well, they can believe that they are doing the right thing. Us as sentient beings sometimes are, well, we are very good at deluding ourselves into believing that we act for altruistic rather than selfish reasons, but I'm getting off track a little bit. I realize that as he shoots a look up to Ignitrix.
Yeah, she's already kind of giving you that look like, move along.
So, I want you to tell me as objectively as you can, are there any instances when Lieutenant Kader has behaved questionably while on duty?
There are a couple of instances that come to mind. One of our first encounters after we were thrust into a different timeline than our own, Lieutenant Kader seemed to operate the sensors as if he were the commanding officer, conducting scans and hailing the unknown ship without being given any such order. In that instance, it was sort of incidental, as the order was about to be given, but it was notable. Furthermore, there was an instance where, in the midst of a personal dispute, I believe, the doctor decided to dispense a somewhat unnecessary dose of drugs to a fellow crewman in an effort to cause him to go to sleep, when simply resigning him to his quarters would probably have done the same job, as the man was exhausted. And I do believe there was an instance where he used his telepathic abilities not inappropriately, in so much as he used them well. However, he did use them without the other crew members' consent in an effort to jog some of her memories free.
So, really, what we have here is a catalog, sort of laundry list, if you will, of examples of Lieutenant Kader removing the agency of his captain and his crewmates because he believed that he knew better.
Yes, sir.
And tell me, Commander, I know that we've already established that the captain did not do anything beyond reprimand him. Were there any punitive actions taken on your part as first officer? As crew discipline is ultimately your responsibility.
It is. I did find myself fairly overwhelmed by the position at first, just due to the nature of trying to staff a starship with a complement of an ordinary complement of 300 with an actual complement of 10. However, I did not, in fact, have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Kader, as the captain decided to handle that matter himself.
Well, of course, and because
we did consider a reduction in duties, but as we were so short-handed, it was hard to justify.
I understand, and thank you. And for the record, I don't question the captain or your choices as first officer. As an XO myself, I know what a handful that job is. But what I want to stress here is when you saw a problem, you addressed it with the captain. The captain said, "I'll handle this." And you agreed because that's the chain of command. That is how we function. If we do not have discipline and order, we break down, and bad things happen. It's just unfortunate that this bad thing had to happen. But for right now, Commander, I have no further questions. Thank you for your time.
And as Dotig wanders back, Fleet Admiral looks over at you, Abasi. Defense, you may cross-examine.
Bashi gives a small shake of his head. I have no questions at this time.
Very well, Mr. Droxine, you may step down. And of course, as you filter on out of the stand, the Fleet Admiral tings the bell once and says, "We'll be taking a 5 to 10 minute break. Stick around. We'll be back shortly." Welcome back. And as everyone filters back into the courtroom, Ignitrix chimes the bell twice and says, "All right, let's get this thing back underway. Commander Abasi, who's your next witness?"
Bashi's going to stand once again. I would like to call Captain Rilor to the stand, please.
And I would say that for those who are in the gallery, I think that's what it's actually called, there's almost like a hush sort of, what do you mean they're going to call Captain Rilor? I don't know. And Ignitrix does sort of take out a gavel and bang it once, like says, "Order, order. Ember, please locate the captain." And Ember says, "You got it, boss." And Ember departs the courtroom. And there's a good period of about 5 to 10 minutes where everybody's just sort of like looking at each other, having hushed conversations. And it's probably about that time where it's getting really, really awkward that Ember finally enters into the courtroom with Future Rilor in tow. So, for those who don't know Future Rilor, she is wearing a 29th century uniform, bearing the rank of a captain. And Ember escorts her up to the stand, swears her in, and as soon as Rilor sits down, she kind of looks over at the Admiral. Admiral nods and then turns to you and says, "Well, Mr. Abasi, we've found your witness. Please feel free to proceed."
Thank you, ma'am. Abasi will step forward. Captain, if you would, your name and rank?
My name, as I can explain it, is Miss Rilor. I am the former captain of the U.S.S. Relativity, 29th century, and that's about as much as I can tell you.
Within the bounds of what you are allowed to tell us, how did you come to be on the Bastet?
Well, it just so happened that you and your crew came to investigate a temporal anomaly. You found an exploding relativity and moved to not only provide assistance, but rescue operations as well.
Thank you. Now, the existence of Verissa as a plant on our crew, you are the one who clued us into this, correct?
That is correct.
And if you would, for the court, what was your recommended course of action?
Well, I believe my course of action was either to throw her in the brig or let me shoot her.
So in this instance, Lieutenant Kader followed what you believed would have been the correct course of action.
That is correct. I am still full Betazoid. I did sense him touch my mind to confirm my emotional state.
Now, before this trial, I did some due diligence and some research. I wonder, are you familiar with Starfleet Special Order 66715, subsection 7 Alpha?
Add a character I don't, but I can say where you're going with this, so I think Rilor says, doesn't really come to mind, but I suppose you're going to tell me.
The stated special order reads as follows. Starfleet and Starfleet officers have the authority to neutralize security threats by any and all means necessary when the threat is deemed a direct risk to temporal integrity. Would you say that Lieutenant Kader's actions follow the special order?
Now that you remind me of the actual number, I do apologize. There's so many. Sorry, Admiral, I'll get to the point. Yes, I do believe that he acted within the boundaries of this special order.
With that stated, I have no further questions.
And as you step away, R'hllor actually looks over at Ignitrix and says, "Can I say something?" And Ignitrix looks back at R'hllor and says, "You're going to have to squeeze it into Mr. Dotig's time with you. You should have been a little bit more quick on the draw there, R'hllor. Mr. Dotig, your witness."
Captain R'hllor, the Counsel for the Defense has cited a very interesting precedent. Do have the authority to neutralize security threats when they pose an immediate threat to the timeline. Do you believe that Lieutenant Veressa was such a threat?
Most heartedly. And again, she hesitates and looks at the Admiral, and the Admiral finally just sighs deeply and says, "All right, I can see we're not going to get anywhere if we have to keep pussyfooting around regulations. Yes, R'hllor, you may break the Temporal Prime Directive to try this case." R'hllor says, "Okay, yeah, cool. All right." And she actually gets a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more like current R'hllor, less, sitting up straight. She kind of slouches a little bit and says, "Yeah, going to be leveling with you, Dotig. Verissa, we've known, has been a plant for pretty much since she has been on every version of the Bastet. I could give you specific instances, but 99.99997% of the time, Verissa turns out to be a Romulan sleeper agent."
I accept that. Accept you at your word. You are under oath. Can you please define neutralize for the court?
Well, in this instance, especially as it relates to temporal operations, we have two options. We can either correct the timeline by stopping the original event from happening, or we have the authority to actually eliminate, destroy, and do whatever is necessary to restore the timeline.
Right, so in this instance, your first instinct after, in general, half a dozen plus loops was to kill the intruder, correct?
That is correct. It was the first loop that I was aware of her presence.
Very good. If it was the first loop that you were aware of her presence, then how could you know she was a threat in all other iterations?
Well, it's a good thing I don't have to worry about the Prime Directive here. 29th century temporal operations are an enigma, and the best way I can think to describe it is we are essentially the same as a fire watchtower. We float above the timeline, comparing every single instance, every single action against what we know to be the correct timeline. And when we spot a problem, we know so thanks to our temporal sensors, temporal computers, etc., etc., etc. So in this instance, we knew ahead of time that Verissa was going to be a problem with the Bastet pretty much from the first time the Bastet showed up on our records. And let me be very clear, they show up in more records than a certain Janeway does, and that is an impressive amount of times.
Indeed. But Captain, Veressa isn't dead, and the timeline is intact. Therefore, it was not completely necessary to kill her. Therefore, I would posit neutralize simply means either hold in the brig or hold in stasis, not kill. Would you agree?
This time she doesn't answer, she actually remains silent.
And he'll look up at the Fleet Admiral and say, Your Honor, I would ask that the witness be directed to answer.
And interestingly, the Fleet Admiral looks at R'hllor. They share another look. And R'hllor just very imperceptibly gives a shake of her head no. And the Fleet Admiral says, well, as irregular as it is, Mr. Datig, I'm going to have to allow the right of human rules and regulations. I was going to mention the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to speak. You know what I'm getting at. It's been a very long day. And
well, forgive me, Fleet Admiral, but that regulation only prohibits self-incrimination. Captain R'hllor is not on trial.
That is true. You know what? Fair point. You'd think I know my own courtroom. Well, R'hllor, what do you have to say to that? And this time, R'hllor looks at Ember. And Ember nods. And it is at this point that here is the ELH twist. R'hllor, the Fleet Admiral, and Ember all pull out a Type 1 phaser in unison, point it towards Commander Abbasi and Kader, and before anyone can react, the phasers have already been fired. But they do not strike the commander or Kader. They strike a point behind Kader and Abbasi. And materializing as if out of the ether is a Lieutenant Verissa. And as Verissa is stunned to the floor, R'hllor, sits up a little bit straighter and says, well, now that that's handled, Mr. Datig, I can answer the question. That is why I was being a little obtuse. Because until we fully get the temporal shielding installed on the station, that can happen.
So are you telling me that's another iteration
of
the same person?
Exactly.
Regardless, Bastet returned safely to this timeline to rejoin us here on Deep Space October. So, this will be my last question. Was it necessary to kill that iteration of Verissa, yes or no?
The one we just stunned, or...?
No, the one that Lieutenant Kader attempted to murder.
To my knowledge, she was murdered.
And he'll just sort of look at the records officer and say, I was under the impression that she survived.
And Tivna pulls up the record and says, no, I have recorded death at 23:53. Which, out of character, that is the time that she actually died when Kader did the injection.
Commander Tivna, could you please pull up the medical logs? I believe it will show that the crew of the Bastet, minus Lieutenant Kader, of course, was able to resuscitate Verissa.
And Tivna works the console a little bit and then frowns and says, I have no record of that, sir. I'm sorry.
So it's no longer just attempted murder, it's now just plain old murder.
And R'hllor sort of speaks up and says, no, best way I can tell you what's just happened is there is a temporal shockwave that is affecting the logs in question.
Of course there is.
Trust me, this is why we don't do court-martials in the 29th century, because it gets way too confusing.
Well, I mean, judging by your past conduct, you probably just have them lined up against the wall and shot.
And she actually maybe gets a little aggressive. She sort of sits up, leans forward a little bit, and says, all right, Datig, since we appear to be somewhat off the record as Ember drags that one out, and we sort of we pan the camera over and we see Ember dragging the Verissa, time clone out.
By the ankles?
Yeah, literally like either under the arms or by the ankles. And
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Going back to R'hllor says, "So, Mr. Dottig, remember that one time with the Iconian Gateway that you kind of let a certain ensign take over?"
I do.
Hmm. And do you know why the Gateway hasn't been a problem?
Why is that?
Well, because I fixed your problem for you.
You're going to have to take that one up with my former commanding officer.
Oh, I'm not here to shift blame. I'm just here to tell you that I've worked with so many cases over the years that I know it may seem to you that I'm a callous bitch that has no regard for human life or life at all. Job changes you, which, frankly, I'm already beginning to see the signs that it's changing the crew of the Bastet.
Captain, I'm not unsympathetic to the rigors of your job, both physical and psychological. The fact remains, Starfleet and the Federation cannot abandon their ideals simply to complete a mission. If we do, we are no better than those we see as enemies. And I would argue there's a room for a brisk philosophical discussion as to whether or not individuals who can so easily discard their guiding principles are worthy of survival. You may step down.
And she does so. And it is at this point that as Ember filters back in that Fleet Admiral looks over at R'hllor and says, "Well, go do whatever it was the hell you were doing before we had to deal with the time clone issue. Thank you for letting me know about that, by the way. Would have been really a shame if they had snapped Kader's neck before we could deliver judgment." And R'hllor just sort of nods, and R'hllor steps out of the courtroom. At this point, Fleet Admiral looks over at you, Abasi, and says, "Well, Abasi, if I understand your defense tactic at this point, I believe there's only one other person you can call to the stand right now."
I believe the only one I have left to call that would be a benefit to the defense would be Lieutenant Kader himself.
Well, Mr. Kader, if you want to take the stand. And yeah, Droxine, I was wondering if anybody would catch that or if Dottig would catch that. So I'll give Aaron the discretion here if he wants to.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he'll raise his hand and say, "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I believe it's the prosecution's turn to call a witness."
No, my mistake. Dottig, did you want to call anyone besides Kader?
Yes, I call Lieutenant Tavarin to the stand.
As in, out of character, you said Tavarin, right? I heard
Varissa,
and I was like, why Varissa?
No.
Okay,
Yeah, Tavarin,
all right.
Sorry.
So, Tavarin, I'm assuming you've been present, etc., etc.?
Yes.
Okay. So, Tavarin, you take the stand, read in all the lovely things that go with it. And yeah, take it away, Dottig.
Lieutenant, I'll try to keep this brief. I know that yourself and Lieutenant Kader didn't see eye to eye on a great many things. I know you aren't friends.
That would be an understatement, but yes.
But I want you to try to stay as dispassionate as possible about these proceedings and answer truthfully to the best of your ability.
Doctor, there's nothing more important to me than Starfleet regulations. I may have a unpleasant disposition, but I understand my duty. And as you so eloquently put it, our first duty is to the truth.
Indeed. There are a couple of instances during your missions that I'd like to get your opinion on. Not opinion, recollection of, shall we say. I believe there are several instances of, well, simply put, medical malpractice by Lieutenant Kader against yourself specifically. The first instance I'd like to explore is the case of I believe, a plasma burn that you were refused treatment for.
Yes. We had uncovered an underwater facility that appeared to be a 29th century construct, a temporal transporter. Well, in the process of attempting to restore power to that facility, I was leading a separate away team that consisted of myself in command, Lieutenant Kader, and Lieutenant Alexio. Well, we managed to restore power. A feedback loop developed that resulted in a small plasma discharge. I suffered third-degree plasma burns, and during the ensuing argument, the doctor initially refused to treat me.
Can you remember his exact words?
I believe that he said something to the effect of you being an asshole, or me being an asshole, and that I should suffer with it.
An interesting interpretation of the Starfleet's physician oath. And of course, there's the previously mentioned assault with medical grade sedative. Can you please give us the lead up to this event in your own words?
Due to my attempt to assume duties as both an engineer and a tactical officer, I mean, everyone's pulling double and triple shifts, assuming more responsibilities than anyone, even a seasoned veteran officer, should. But I was feeling the effects, and in a conversation between the doctor, myself, and the captain, I attempted to convince the captain that I should be allowed to stay at my post, given the unpredictable nature of our situation. We didn't know as we were traveling what we would encounter, whether it would be hostile forces on the other side of the temporal vortex in which we were traveling, and I felt that it would be best for me to remain at my post. I suggested that the doctor provide me with a neurocortical monitor that would be able to assess my condition and monitor me in real time. As I was making my case, the doctor injected me with what I am given to understand was an exceptionally powerful sedative, cutting me off in the middle of my attempt to convince the captain that I should be allowed to continue my duties.
The court will note that Starfleet medical personnel are expressly forbidden from applying treatment to conscious, sentient individuals who refuse it. That being said, Lieutenant, I believe in that instance you were wrong.
Is that a question, Doctor?
It is not. It is withdrawn. Let's go back to the day in question, in which Lieutenant Kader either murdered or attempted to murder this Schrodinger's paradox of an individual named Veresa. For the sake of the temporal directive, let's say that she's both dead and alive at the same time. As the Captain Relore held this unconscious individual at phaser point, what was your reaction to the situation? We've heard from Lieutenant Alexius that he stepped in front to shield her body. What was your reaction?
Initially, I ordered Captain R'hllor to stand down, given that Starfleet regulations regarding the treatment of prisoners of war and conduct of officers towards those prisoners are laid out by all relevant treaties and their stipulations.
The court will note that Lieutenant Tavarin is referencing Starfleet General Order 4. Starfleet expressly forbids the death penalty. Very good. And as events unfolded, what happened next?
Although I was unable to convince Captain R'hllor to stand down, before further intervention became necessary, Lieutenant Alexio interceded. At that point, there was very little for me to do, and the Bastet itself was in a rather precarious position, so I returned to my station.
Very good. And did you witness the doctor administering his treatment?
I saw that the doctor had moved to Lieutenant Verissa. I had assumed that he was administering some kind of treatment, but I have very little familiarity with any kind of medicine beyond the most basic application of field treatments, so it wasn't something that I was focusing on at that moment.
Of course. And of course, we learned later that what he injected her with was a very potent nanovirus, a biological weapon in itself, illness weaponized. Was this substance part of the ship's complement?
Not to my knowledge, no. I'm given to understand that such a weapon would be banned by almost all known treaties. A nanotechnological maltech weapon of that sort is not something that the Federation would ever employ, nor would they store it except for the purposes of attempting to counter it in some way or develop an antigen.
Very good. Did Lieutenant Kader ever elaborate as to where he procured such a sample?
In retrospect, I likely should have interrogated the doctor when I took him into custody and brought him to the brig. But, like Lieutenant Alexio, I didn't think that the doctor had it in him. I didn't think that he would kill someone like that. I don't know.
Well, thank you for not speculating. I have no further questions, and he'll turn to Abasi before he goes back to his bench and say, "Your witness."
Abasi will stand. I have no further questions.
Well then, Mr. Tavarin, you may step down. And now, would you still like to call Mr. Kader to the stand there, Abasi?
Yes, I would.
Well, Mr. Kader, you've been rather quiet. And yeah, as you come up there, Ember reads you in, settles in, and then, yeah, take it from there, Abasi.
Lieutenant Kader, if you would guide us through the events of the day in question, please.
Kader's going to let out a heavy sigh, and is just going to kind of shake his head a little bit. Humanity, in its many forms, I don't know if we were ever truly meant to touch the vastness of space. The horrors of the unknown, the void, beings beyond time, space, godlike snap their fingers and change the very fabric of reality. Monsters that feed upon the existence of space itself, and then us, flying in tin cans, just bumbling through it all. With all of that horror, we are expected to uphold a arbitrary set of rules, morals that were determined by someone who sits at a desk and says, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. Survival. Survival is the only truth in the universe. This courtroom sits here in this hall judging me because I acted in the interest of survival. The survival of my ship, my fellow crew, my family, and likely the only family I'll ever know because of the nature of our circumstances. I did what I did to protect them, knowing that they would throw me away, cast me aside as a pariah after I know I did what needed to be done. So I have nothing more to say other than to cast whatever judgment you will upon me. I sit here before you all without regret, without hesitation, for the principle I hold most dear: survival. And I promise you this: the Bastet, against all odds and enemies both outside and within, will survive.
And the Admiral sort of blinks very slowly and says, "Well, I will simply say, Mr. Kader, that if you have another outburst like that, I will hold you in contempt of court. But I take this to mean that you are now pleading the fifth for all intents and purposes."
I am.
Very well. In light of Mr. Kader pulling the fifth, Datig, unfortunately, you are not going to get a cross-examination. I'm going to need about 5 minutes to deliberate what to do here, unless you have something further, Mr. Datig or Mr. Abasi.
I do. Datig will rise and he will look pointedly at Kader
Mm-hmm.
and say, "Stop me if you've heard this one before. I swear by all that I hold sacred, with respect, compassion, humility, and dedication to the welfare of all life, that according to my best ability and judgment I will keep the following oath. I will be loyal to the profession of medicine and to the highest good of all sentient life, and I will treat with justice and compassion all those who come to me seeking care. I will lead my life and practice my profession with uprightness and honor, and I will abstain forever from all corrupt behavior and all vice. Wherever I travel, I will seek to do good for all people, whether sick or well, and I will never deliberately cause harm to any sentient being. I will not practice my profession for any motive or profit other than the best care of those patients entrusted to me, and I will never practice in the aid of any criminal or ethically wrong endeavor. I will be completely honest with my patients in all matters. When such honesty requires me to deliver bad news, I will always take the patient's beliefs and customs into consideration. Whether my patients tell me in the course of their care shall remain forever secret with me. I will sit in judgment of no one, regardless of their illness or circumstances, but will always provide them care to the best of my ability without prejudice. I will not refuse care to any patient, regardless of their species, race, gender, creed, or affiliation. I will remain a student my whole professional life, striving to learn as much as possible about my profession from other physicians and patients alike. I will also function as a teacher for my patients and allow them to make the best choices about their care. As long as I faithfully observe the tenets of this oath, I shall be entitled to call myself physician, with all the respect and honor accorded thereto. But if I should ever violate this oath, the reverse shall be my lot. You have no business in this service, in that uniform, or in this society. And it is my deepest wish that at the bare minimum, Lieutenant Kader spend 5 years in the New Zealand penal colony and be barred from the practice of medicine for life. The prosecution rests."
And Fleet Admiral just sort of blinks again and says, "Maybe I should, in future JAG situations, tell people to not be in contempt of court. I feel like maybe I should add that to my whole spiel. Mr. Abasi, do you have anything to add before I enter into deliberation?"
I do not. The defense rests.
Very well. Ember, make sure they don't kill each other. I'll be back in about 5 to 10 minutes. And the Admiral steps out, and almost as if expecting a fight to break out, Ember just sort of sits in the center of the court, like on edge, ready to pounce at whoever moves first. But this is a moment that people in the gallery can interact with those on the stand. Those that are currently sitting at the desk can do vice versa, have conversations. I wanted to give you all a chance to interact before the Fleet Admiral came down.
I think Abasi is just going to be sitting at the desk.
If possible, I think that Thavarin would like to speak with Commander Datig for just one moment.
Yeah, that can happen.
So Thavarin would approach the desk somewhat tentatively, and what would Datig be doing as he's approaching?
You're muted, as
muted.
is tradition.
He would be just going over the sort of case notes on a pad.
Doctor, do you have a moment?
Yes, Lieutenant, and please, it's just Commander these days.
Given how you recited that oath, I'm not entirely certain that's the case, sir. But if you prefer Commander, that's perfectly right. Thank you. That's really what I wanted to say. Thank you for upholding the principles of the Federation. And that might sound really rather trite and infantile, but it's what I appreciate at the moment.
My people are known for being argumentative and contrarian. That we do it out of some type of spite or malice or vitriol. None of those things are true. We do it because we seek meaning in every situation. Words are powerful. My culture nearly destroyed itself in numerous wars over what to call a table, what to call a ship, what to call a house. The reason we did that is because we believe there is objective truth, and it must be sought at all costs. What I did today, well, to be honest, I did it because I was ordered to. But that being said, I have a connection to cases involving the medical field. And as somebody who never would have gotten a chance to see the stars without Starfleet, I owe it my best effort in everything I do.
You know, Commander, I've always believed, ever since I was a young boy, that it's conflict that defines us. Conflict is the most sincere articulation of any one of our values. It's where they find expression and meaning, and where those values come into conflict with each other is the way in which we arrive at truth. The best, whether it be a person, a skill, or an ideal, comes to the forefront. This adversarial process has been the purest distillation of that philosophy that I've ever seen. And out of the conflict between you and the captain, and the conflict between the worldviews evidenced by your appeal to regulation and rule and order, law, and the Kader's single-minded fixation on survival for its own sake, I think the best has emerged. The best has won out. And I truly appreciate that.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Has anybody ever told you that you kind of talk like an Andorian?
It's been mentioned on occasion, although my father always said that I had a strange lisping hiss that I never really could get rid of.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, the last time I had to do this, the thanks were not forthcoming.
And I
If the
think
truth came out, it was worthwhile.
I think it is at that moment that the door opens and Ember sort of shouts, "All right, everybody up, you know the drill." And of course, they go through that whole tradition, everybody rising, judge sitting down, etc., etc. And as Fleet Admiral chimes the bell again, she folds her arms across her chest and says, "In times like this, I hope people won't mind if I monologue just a little bit. The best way I can think to start is to talk a little bit about the unique circumstances of our court case today. We've heard that, by all rights, Kader has done many things that would already warrant stripping him of his medical license and more or less kicking him out of Starfleet. However, there is something else that was said in the course of events. To put it plainly, I feel that Starfleet and the Starfleet of the future are at somewhat odds with each other. I think that, and this may seem ironic coming from a species like mine, but I feel as if Mr. Datig has a point that the moment we abandon our principles to become ultimate arbiters of what is right and wrong, that we lose sight of the uniform we wear and the code we are sworn to uphold. However, I also do recognize the unique position that the Bastet crew has found themselves in. Hell, I'm surprised they've made it this far. Any other crew would have torn themselves apart, would have ended up dead, would have ended up destroyed, would have ended up lost in space forever. But they didn't die. They didn't give up. They made it back to not even their own time, but their own reality was forfeit to them. Again, most people would go insane. Most people would otherwise give up and fall in and fail to continue to uphold those regulations. So in a way, I don't exactly agree with what Mr. Kader did, but I can appreciate the reasoning behind it. And while I am about to pass judgment on Mr. Kader for his actions, I would simply say that the moment we write off wholesale another's actions, the moments we are unable to understand the mindset of an individual, the moment we are unable to, as the humans say, put themselves in their shoes or something to that effect, we lose our objectivity. We lose our way to observe a circumstance in such a manner. Mr. Kader, there is no easy sentence for you. It is abundantly clear that you are unable and unfit to provide any medical services from this point forward. However, I cannot just throw you into a New Zealand penal colony. I cannot sentence you to, say, a Klingon facility. I cannot sentence you to any known conceivable jail because of your unique interaction with the timeline. Hell, even keeping you here on DSO would otherwise carry with it some risk. However, it is abundantly clear that you cannot remain on the Bastet. That your family, as much as you wish to help them, will never trust you again. Which puts me in a bit of a bind. I either tell you to remain on the Bastet, concealed within quarters with people who wish they didn't wish you were on the ship and were otherwise got rid of, or I tell you to deal with the fact that if something goes wrong in the timeline, that your existence could be erased completely. Neither is preferable, but as judge and executioner, it is my duty to deliver such a verdict. Therefore, I'm going to give you something that might not be the most conventional of sentencings, but it's the only one I can think of that's fair. The next time I hear from a 29th century captain, I'm going to have them take you under their wing. They can do with you as they wish, but you'll at least be afforded some measure of objectivity that I cannot provide on my own station. Until such a time has passed, you will remain here on Deep Space October. You will be banned from leaving your quarters except under direct supervision of Master Chief Ember. And if Master Chief Ember wishes to impart any further restrictions, that is her right as security officer. And she sighs and lowers her head. I wish I could do more, but it's all I can really think to do at this juncture. Unless anyone has any objections or wish to appeal, and she looks very pointedly at Abasi and Kader before saying anything further.
Abasi will shake his head negative.
And Kader?
Just looks straight ahead, emotionless.
Very well. Chimes the bell 3 times. This court is adjourned. Master Chief Ember, please take Mr. Kader into custody.
Kader doesn't resist.
And I think with the Admiral's speech still sort of on the mind, we're actually going to cut ahead a little bit to one of the many clubs that is present on Deep Space October. A Vulcan club, located in one of the lowest reaches of Deep Space October, and perhaps where some of the most interesting conversations on the station take place. And what we see is, as we zoom into the penthouse bar, we see Commander Abasi sitting by himself when a certain captain, a Bajoran captain, walks up with something smoking.
Commander, is this seat taken?
Abasi will look up, not having expected anyone to even approach him. Captain, no, please, join me.
Thank you. And he'll take a seat and place his drink down on the table without sampling it. Is Abasi drinking anything? Is there anything on the table?
In front of Abasi, there will be a solid metal mug. Whatever was in it at one point would have been hot, has long since gone cold.
Not in a drinking mood, Commander?
Not particularly in much of a mood for anything at all right now.
It's understandable given what I understand of your circumstances, or what I've heard of them from my first officer.
Your first officer, sir?
You certainly remember him from the trial, Lieutenant Commander Datig. He's the first officer of my ship, the Congo.
Quite an impassioned man, if I say so.
And a compassionate one. His prickly demeanor belies a healer's heart, whether he's a doctor or a first officer.
Abasi just nods his head slowly. This is the first time I've encountered anything remotely like this. I'm not sure how to do it.
Remotely like what, if you don't mind my asking?
Being the one responsible, being the one that's supposed to be in charge. I was an engineer. I never had any sort of formal command training, and it was all just thrust upon me.
I was a chief engineer for some time before I was promoted to captain. Now, granted, I had the advantage of a career as a first officer and command training before I moved into my first command on board the Congo. But regardless of what position we assume, Commander, we're always responsible for other people's lives. Engineers save people's lives through the minutiae of everyday maintenance. You take on the responsibility for your shipmates when you're changing plasma coils and calibrating sensors. It's a horrifying thing to think about, really. about how we are all dependent on each other. The difference for a captain is that he has to bear that burden alone.
That fact seems more and more apparent as the days go by.
Commander, I'm afraid I don't have any easy answers for you. Largely because I don't think there are any. A captain really does live day by day, trying his best, adhering to his principles as best as he can, and sometimes compromising them when it means the survival of his ship. It's a terrible burden, one that only perhaps a doctor or other captains could understand.
I say Abasi just kind of looks down into his mug again. I've gone over that moment time and time again. I can't say if I see it playing out any differently at all. And I don't know how to handle that.
It's something you learn to live with. And that doesn't mean it stops hurting. That doesn't mean that the pain disappears or that the sense of recrimination really does abate, at least fully. But that's part of being a captain. It's about making the choices and then living with the consequences. But what I've found is that no man is an island sufficient to himself. No man can really bear that burden alone. As a person and as a captain, I realized that I needed people in my life that I could be intimate with, people that I could rely on when that burden became too heavy for me alone. Sometimes it's other captains, sometimes it's my wife. I think, Commander, you need that. I don't know where you can find it, but you need it.
Abasi will just nod slowly. A quick look, his tail is just hanging limp behind him off the side of the chair. I think you may be right.
One thing I will say is that you've taken a good first step, and that's not drinking. And Lee will take the frothing mug off of the desk and then down it in one go. That that Bajoran spring wine and Klingon fire wine cocktail, that is not something you should be drinking actually alcoholic. That you should reserve that for synthahol. Yeah, don't end up like me.
I'll endeavor not to.
You're supposed to disagree, Commander, but I've seen a lot of men turn to self-destruction rather than other people. That's what's at the end of the road of isolation, self-immolation. I do know that from personal experience.
Well, I suppose I just need to find some people to talk to then.
You'd be amazed at how much intimacy can help.
And I think there is where we start to pull out of the penthouse bar, out of one of the many windows, and we just sort of see Deep Space October slowly turning as the logo of Bastet comes on screen, and we end today's session. So yeah, what did you guys think?
All right, I'm going to jump in real quick. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah.
You did
No.
so good. That last speech, I'm sitting here getting emotional. I'm like, this is amazing.
No, thank you.
Oh my God, that was fantastic, man. I thank you for joining us. That was fucking great.
No, thank you all for having me. It was wonderful. I hope my horrible nervousness didn't show too much.
No,
There
not
was
at all.
nerves?
No.
Rock
There were
solid.
nerves? What?
Not even the slightest.
Yeah, no, I was. Yeah, like I'm just gonna say, like ELH, I was super nervous coming in here and a little bit intimidated. I'm not gonna lie, with no logical and rational reason to be, but it's just it's just the way I am.
Fair. Well, I'm glad that you had a good time.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, fantastic.
Cool.
Not gonna lie, I kind of feel like I got promoted. I'm going to
So I
future.
actually wanted to talk about that a little bit because I did see a few people speculating in chat, which I love. I love when people speculate. So I know I'm not the best when it comes to monologues. That's sort of my weakness. So I don't know if my Ignitrix's speech was even profound or even worth anything. But
It was good.
the thinking was that until you get onto a temporal ship like the Bastet, which the only way to do that is to go to the 29th century. So it's not as if he's getting a promotion.
I know.
If anything, he's just being transferred to somewhere that can hold him. So in a sense, it's more a temporal jail than it is a promotion, is what I would say on that.
Get it.
Until Kader gets recruited by the temporal section 31.
Yeah.
Oh no.
The survival of Starfleet is all that
Yeah.
matters.
That's all. Survival is the only mission.
Which I thought
I think
about.
you're our season 3 villain.
Yeah, I was
I
going to say.
think I might be.
Oh man,
Yeah.
imagine.
Hey, if ELH, if you ever decide to bring Kader back as a season 3 villain, I would totally play him.
Noted. No, the only thing I would say is that I didn't get an opportunity to do it, but I was almost waiting for either Datig or Abasi to start questioning Relore about, did you order the code red or something along that lines? And I was going to go, you can't handle the truth. You know where I was going with that. But yeah, it was a really good session. I'm glad people had fun with it. So YouTube, this is where we say goodbye, but Twitch, stick around because we're going to raid somebody. But YouTube, see you later.